3:47 a.m., Clover Ridge Road, rural Fayette County, Kentucky. June 2, 2026. A 12-vehicle convoy rolled without headlights down a corridor of white-painted four-rail fence and summer dark horse pasture, moving at exactly 22 miles per hour, all units maintaining precise spacing with no communication. FBI Louisville Tactical Response Unit. Kentucky State Police Emergency Response Teams, 4 units. A Department of Homeland Security Investigations mobile command vehicle, its satellite array folded flat against the roof for transit. 2 medical response vans staged at the rear of the convoy, engines warm, personnel ready. K9 handlers, 2 Belgian Malinois named Colt and Vesper, pacing the convoy on foot at a controlled jog, positioned for simultaneous release the moment the convoy stopped. 41 federal state personnel in total. Briefed 2 hours earlier at a rented warehouse 12 miles from the target property. All radios synchronized to a shared digital clock. Every team holding its position. The air temperature sat at 61 degrees Fahrenheit, with a southeast wind running at 6 knots. Ground fog had settled into the creek bottom along the property's eastern edge, hanging chest-high across the lower paddocks. Visibility inside that fog corridor was less than 30 feet. 2 of the 4 entry vectors crossed the creek bottom. That had been factored into the plan. The lead vehicle, an unmarked FBI Suburban, stopped 200 meters short of the main gate at 3:48 a.m. Commander Mark Teller held his radio in his right hand and watched, through night vision optics, the single exterior security camera mounted on the gate post. The camera was motion activated. It transmitted to a recording unit inside the main barn. If the camera captured the convoy before all 4 breach teams were simultaneously in position, the operation would collapse before it started. 11 seconds. The camera's motion indicator cycled off. Teller keyed his radio. 1 word, now. 12 vehicles hit their lights simultaneously. Every gate was struck at the same instant. The main gate folded under a hydraulic ram mounted on the lead Suburban's bumper in 4 seconds. The secondary service entrance on the facility's south side was cut with commercial bolt cutters in under 10 seconds. The creek bottom fence team moved through the fog on foot using thermal optics, navigating the low visibility corridor exactly as planned. The back paddock breach team reached their position at the northeast corner at 3:49 a.m. and confirmed ready. At 3:52 a.m., K9 handler Rodriguez released Colt into the main barn. At 3:54 a.m., the breach team reached the loft staircase. In a soundproofed hay loft above the back paddock of Bluegrass Heritage Stables. The youngest was 7 years old. The oldest was 14. They had been held there, in rotation, for periods ranging from 3 weeks to 61 days. All of them were alive. This is the story of how a 22-year-old night shift stable hand named Caleb Ritter walked into a Kentucky State Police barracks at 4 a.m. on a Thursday morning carrying a manila envelope full of feed delivery receipts and set in motion the largest child trafficking rescue operation in Kentucky federal history. He almost didn't do it. That part matters. Bluegrass Heritage Stables sat on 340 acres of prime bluegrass country horse land, 11 miles southwest of Lexington, Kentucky. The property had operated continuously as an equestrian facility since 1989, originally founded by the Carver family as a thoroughbred training and boarding operation, with a regional reputation built over 3 decades. The Carvers sold the property in 2019, a routine rural real estate transaction, reviewed by both parties' attorneys, closing without incident. The buyer was a Delaware-registered limited liability company named Meridian Equestrian Holdings. Purchase price $4.2 million, paid at closing. The closing attorney was a recognized Lexington real estate practice. The sale was recorded with Fayette County in June 2019. Meridian kept the existing staff, maintained the facility's equine transport certificates, renewed its state veterinary inspection license and county business permits without interruption, continued the summer youth riding camps that had been part of the operation since the mid-90s, expanded them, in fact, adding a junior dressage track in 2020 and a mounted trail camp in 2021 that drew enrollment from Fayette and 5 surrounding counties. Parents left reviews on the facility's Facebook page. Local schools ran field trips to the stable during the academic year. The facility's board of advisors included a former Kentucky State Agriculture Commissioner, a retired circuit court judge, and a Lexington real estate developer with recognized civic credentials. All of those people were legitimate. All of them believed they were affiliated with an equestrian operation. By late 2025, Bluegrass Heritage Stables had 28 registered horses, 8 full-time employees, federal equine transport certification in good standing, and a facility reputation built across 6 years of unremarkable operation. On paper and databases everywhere, nothing unusual. That cover didn't happen by accident. Federal investigators later called the 3 years between the Meridian acquisition and the beginning of criminal activity an establishment phase, a period of building documented legitimacy before using the infrastructure for its actual purpose. This pattern appears in trafficking case files with enough consistency that it has its own name in trafficking analysis. Networks that invest time in cover depth before activating it are measurably harder to detect and significantly harder to prosecute. By the time Bluegrass Heritage Stables became active, it had 6 years of legitimate operation behind it. It had community members who vouched for it without knowing what they were vouching for. It had regulators who had reviewed and renewed its permits 4 times over. The actual mechanism of the operation was the agricultural transportation corridor. Horse transport in the United States functions under a specialized regulatory framework designed for animal welfare, equine documentation, veterinary certificates, Coggins testing records, interstate health papers. A horse trailer moving through a state line checkpoint is inspected for those documents, not for concealed compartments. No inspector opens the forward tack storage area of a trailer moving along the racing circuit unless specific cause exists. Checkpoint personnel are not looking for false floor panels or modified interior partitions. They are checking Coggins paperwork. The network had identified the modifications were professionally executed. Hidden compartments built into the forward tack section of each trailer, accessed through floor panels, designed to look like standard trailer decking. Ventilation routed through existing frame openings in the trailer's undercarriage, invisible from outside. Interior dimensions, approximately 36 inches high, 8 feet long. Bluegrass Heritage Stables using that system. They arrived. They were held in the loft for periods of 10 to 14 days per the network's original rotation plan. Then they departed via trailer. The movement was calibrated for throughput, short holding times, minimal on-site footprint. Then the system broke down. In late April 2026, something disrupted the downstream receiving capacity. What exactly has not been detailed in public court filings. Whatever the cause, its effect on Bluegrass Heritage Stables was direct and rapid. 7 created supply chain pressure the network hadn't engineered around. More food, more clothing, more medical supplies, more delivery volume moving through channels that had previously maintained a minimal footprint. More feed orders, significantly above what 28 horses required. More delivery manifests, signed for each time by the night shift stable hand. Caleb Ritter had taken the position in January 2026. He'd left the University of Kentucky the previous semester, after a difficult academic year. He needed income. He knew horses. His family kept a small operation in Woodford County. Nothing commercial, just a few animals on family land. He found the stable's position on a regional agricultural job board. Applied Wednesday. Received a call back Wednesday afternoon. Was offered the job at the end of that same call. He'd later tell investigators the speed seemed odd. Farm jobs usually meant an interview, a waiting period. He figured it was seasonal, spring coming, extra hands needed. He took it. 30 days later, his first 10 p.m. shift. His duties were straightforward. Final grain ration, water level checks, colic monitoring, manual temperature log in the clipboard ledger inside the main barn door, receipt of any overnight deliveries. Several agricultural suppliers ran pre-dawn routes to rural facilities to avoid daytime competition for loading docks. Ritter received deliveries several times per week. Feed bags, supplement pallets, shavings bales. He got used to the rhythm of it. The hayloft above the back paddock was explained to him on his first shift. Off limits, potentially compromised floor joists from water damage several years prior. Engineering assessments in progress, repairs pending. The padlock on the staircase door was a liability precaution, while the structural work was scheduled. Ritter accepted the explanation without question. He had no reason not to. For the first 8 weeks, nothing deviated from what he expected. The work was quiet and physical. He learned the horses' names. He learned which ones were fractious at night and which ones slept standing without stirring. He liked the hours, the way the farm was different in the dark, slower, more honest somehow. He logged deliveries, completed his rounds, drove home at 6 a.m. normal. Routine. Unremarkable. The feed deliveries began climbing in early March. The primary supplier was Bluegrass Feeds and Farm Supply, headquartered in Georgetown, roughly 30 miles north. Their driver ran an overnight route that hit the stables every Monday and Thursday, arriving around 1 a.m. In January, a typical delivery was between 18 and 22 50-pound bags of mixed grain, consistent with 28 horses on standard rations, with some margin for variation. Nothing to notice. By early March, deliveries ran 32 to 35 bags per week. By late March, a single Thursday delivery reached 39 50-pound bags. Ritter stacked the pallets each time and did the arithmetic without fully intending to. 28 horses. Even with generous allowances for larger animals or high-activity training periods, 39 50-pound bags in a single week was significantly above what the declared horse population required. He tried to construct explanations. Temporary boarding of additional horses not yet reflected in the official count. A particularly demanding training phase requiring caloric loading. Some operational reason he wasn't aware of. None of the explanations added up precisely. He didn't say anything. He logged the deliveries and continued. On the night of March 28, 2026, the delivery manifest listed them as nutritional supplements, assorted. Ritter set them aside. He told himself someone at the facility had arranged for the supplier to include a personal grocery item on a run, an informal favor not uncommon in rural business relationships. He accepted the explanation and signed the manifest. 12 days later, on April 9th, a delivery included a sealed cardboard box placed at the bottom of a feed pallet. He cut it open. No identifying label indicating who they were for or why they were there. The manifest listed them, miscellaneous dry goods. Ritter stood in the tack room for several minutes, holding a pair of small socks. He put them back in the box. He completed his shift. He drove home. He did not sleep that day. He spent the daylight hours going through his phone photographs. He had developed the habit of photographing each delivery manifest before filing the carbon copy, originally because the carbon copies were sometimes difficult to read clearly in barn lighting, and he wanted legible personal records of what he'd signed for. He had photographs going back to January. He laid the images out on his kitchen table and went through them in sequence. Over 16 weeks of deliveries, he documented 16 distinct instances of non-agricultural goods embedded in the feed manifests. Children's cases of juice boxes listed as beverage concentrate, case lot. Individual packaged snack foods described as food samples, over-the-counter cold medicine listed as pharmaceutical sample, MISC. 16 instances of goods that had no agricultural function. Goods that only made who were not acknowledged in any visible operation at the facility. Ritter understood what he was looking at. The understanding came in the kind of sudden clarity that doesn't feel like a conclusion. It feels like a fact that has been true for a long time, and you have only just caught up to it. He also understood something else immediately. He was the person signing these manifests. He worked alone, overnight. He was the employee with the most physical access to the area closest to the loft. Whatever was in that loft, whoever was in that loft, the people who had put them there knew who he was, knew his schedule, and knew he had been signing these receipts for months. He did not return to the farm for his next scheduled shift. He called in sick, the first time he had done so. He spent 36 hours deciding what to do. He considered calling 911 and dismissed it. The call would be logged to local dispatch, and he had no way to know who in the local system might have a connection to the facility or to whoever operated it. He considered the FBI's public tip line and dismissed it. Too slow, he thought, too likely to be delayed or filed somewhere. He considered calling a lawyer first and rejected the delay that would require. He drove to Kentucky State Police Post 7 on News Circle Road in Lexington at 4:10 a.m. on a Thursday. He had chosen Post 7 specifically. He had passed it on drives since childhood. It was far enough from Lexington's commercial center to feel removed from local politics, and it had the specific, ordinary solidity of a barracks he trusted for reasons he couldn't fully articulate. He carried a manila envelope containing 37 printed photographs of delivery manifests and a handwritten 3-page timeline he had spent the intervening hours composing: dates, delivery quantities, descriptions of items, precise manifest language. He told the desk sergeant, "I work at Bluegrass Heritage Stables. Property. I am not leaving this building until someone looks at what I have brought." The desk sergeant called his supervisor at home. The supervisor came in, looked at the photographs, made 3 calls. By 9 a.m. it was Special Agent Dana Hamill reviewed it that morning. 9 years in the unit, 32 trafficking cases under her belt, 11 convictions. Her approach to the Ritter disclosure was careful and deliberate. The manifests were significant, the pattern was suggestive, but an alternative explanation, implausible but not legally disprovable, still existed. A warrant application based solely on delivery manifest anomalies would face challenges in federal court. The Bureau's protocol required ruling out the alternative interpretation before committing tactical resources. She requested a full financial investigation on Meridian Equestrian Holdings and its principals. The review began that same afternoon. It took 11 days. I spent significant time going through the financial forensics section of the case file after the operation concluded. The banking picture is worth understanding in detail because it illustrates exactly how these networks structure their financial architecture to survive routine scrutiny. Meridian Equestrian Holdings maintained its visible operational accounts at a Louisville-based regional bank: payroll, vendor payments, facility expenses, boarding fee revenue. Everything auditable, everything consistent with the declared size of the operation. Standard small business banking. An external auditor could have reviewed those accounts and found nothing that raised a flag. The secondary layer was different. 2 additional limited liability companies, both registered in Nevada through registered agent services, that legally obscure beneficial ownership under Nevada statutes had been established in 2024 and held in financial structures with no visible connection to Meridian. But bank subpoenas issued by the FBI under the Active Investigation Authority linked those entities to wire transfers that had moved through the Meridian accounts as payment for services listed as consulting and operational management. Each individual transfer was below $15.00, the threshold that triggers automatic currency transaction reporting requirements under federal banking law. The amounts were not random. They had been calculated to stay below the threshold deliberately. The transfers occurred monthly with enough regularity to correspond, in timing, to the transport events through the facility. A forensic accountant from the FBI's Financial Intelligence Unit reviewed the full 18-month transfer sequence over 4 days and issued written assessment. The pattern matched the documented financial signature of trafficking transit payments at a statistically significant confidence level. The amount that had moved through the secondary accounts over the operational period, approximately $1.3 million. On May 14, 2026, the FBI Louisville Field Office formally opened an active federal investigation under the internal codename Operation Blackline. What's most surprising about this case, and it took sitting with the file for a while before this landed, is that the financial architecture wasn't particularly sophisticated. The layering was standard. The threshold management was textbook. The shell structure was competent but not novel. What made it survive is the same thing that made the facility's cover survive: time. 3 years of clean banking before the first dollar of criminal revenue moved. By the time the money was flowing, There was a baseline of legitimate activity that masked the anomalies. The surveillance operation ran from May 14th through June 1st, 41 days. During that period, the operation produced a detailed picture of activity at Bluegrass heritage tables that went significantly beyond what Ritter's manifests had established. Surveillance identified 17 distinct vehicle movements to and from the property outside of documented business hours. 11 involved horse trailers. 6 of those trailers were not logged in the facility's official transport records and could not be matched to any of the farm's registered vehicles. They came at night. They left before dawn. Agents photographed every plate. Surveillance identified the woman operating as the visiting veterinary technician. She arrived in a white Chevrolet pickup truck 3 to 4 times per week, always in the early evening between 5 and 7 p.m., always parking at the back paddock, rather than at the main barn where legitimate veterinary services for horses are administered. She carried insulated bags on every visit. She went directly to the back paddock outbuilding, stayed between 20 and 40 minutes, and left without entering the main barn. A veterinary technician visiting 28 horses would have a reason to be in the main barn. She had no visible reason to avoid it. Her vehicle registration came back to a woman named Sandra Foley, 39, of Nicholasville, Kentucky. A database check confirmed. Sandra Foley had no active veterinary technician license in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. She had no professional credential of any kind that would explain her presence at a horse facility in a medical capacity. She had one prior arrest from 2018 on a fraud charge in Jefferson County that had resulted in a deferred prosecution agreement. Surveillance also documented thermal activity in the loft structure that was inconsistent with storage use. A ventilation gap on the south-facing wall of the loft was visible from the surveillance observation point to the north during the overnight hours, a point of warm light, intermittently visible, on a schedule that corresponded to Foley's arrival and departure times. The lighting appeared and disappeared. Storage does not need lighting that changes on a schedule. The surveillance operation hit its first significant obstacle in the second week. The original camera installation plan had identified a tree line along the western fence perimeter as the optimal concealment position for a stationary visual unit with an unobstructed sight line to the back paddock and loft access point. When the installation team moved to that position on the night of May 17th, the tree line was gone. Recent clearing, within the previous 3 months based on the evidence of fresh-cut stumps, sawdust still present, and the absence of any regrowth. The cleared line of sight was now open pasture. No concealed position within functional camera range remained. Whether the clearing was routine land management or deliberate counter-surveillance preparation, the investigation never definitively established. The effect was the same either way. The primary camera position was compromised before the equipment was installed. The team shifted to a rented residential property 1 mile north, which provided a partial observation angle to the facility's general perimeter from a distance that required high magnification optics. Aerial drone patrols were added on a rotating schedule during daylight hours, operated at altitudes and lateral distances within legal parameters. The warrant application was submitted to Federal Magistrate Judge Carol Winstead in the Eastern District of Kentucky on May 23rd. It requested authorization for physical search of the property, specifically including the hayloft structure above the back paddock. Judge Winstead returned the application on May 24th with a written request for additional evidentiary specificity. The existing submission demonstrated grounds for reasonable suspicion, but had not established probable cause sufficient to authorize breach of a structure whose stated operational use was hay storage. The probable cause section of the application needed to demonstrate, with greater precision, why the loft structure specifically was likely to contain what investigators suspected it contained. The FBI team had 72 hours to supplement the application before a formal denial would be entered. Here's where this case came closest to failure, not because of anything wrong with the investigation, but because of a document. The original application was technically deficient in a specific narrow area of its probable cause language. The evidence was there. The financial forensics, the Foley identification, The vehicle movements, the thermal indications, the manifest documentation from Ritter, taken together, the picture was substantial. The application's drafting simply had not captured that picture with the precision the federal standard required. In 72 hours, the team needed either a witness who had directly observed the interior of the loft or additional technical evidence tied specifically to the loft structure. They had neither. What they did instead: a surveillance drone equipped with a thermal imaging sensor was deployed during the overnight hours of May 25th. The drone operated at an altitude and lateral distance, placing it outside the facility's airspace, within the legal authorization for federal surveillance operations. Over 2 hours of coverage, the thermal imaging data showed heat signatures from the loft structure at 11 distinct points. The signatures held stationary positions for extended periods. They shifted occasionally in patterns consistent with sleeping individuals. Their size and thermal intensity profiles were consistent with human occupants in the small to medium body mass range. They were not consistent with feed material, animal presence, or mechanical equipment. The supplemented application combined the thermal data with the complete financial forensics package, the Ritter manifest documentation, the Foley credential check, and the after-hours vehicle movement records. Judge Winstead approved the supplemented application on May 28th. The warrant was in hand. Unpopular opinion: the system came within one procedural step of failing these six. Application was returned on a drafting issue, not a substantive one. The 72-hour window to supplement was a legitimate mechanism operating exactly as designed. But those 72 hours meant 3 additional days of children. That gap matters. It should inform how these applications are drafted going forward, particularly in cases where the probable cause is apparent from the totality of evidence, but the application language doesn't fully capture why a specific structure is the target. This is the version of events that doesn't make the press releases. If you want to know what these cases actually cost in terms of process friction, hit like before this next section, because this is where it gets complicated. The tactical planning was completed by June 1st. Commander Teller briefed all 41 personnel in the rented warehouse 2 hours before convoy departure. 4-point simultaneous entry. Team assignments for each gate. K9 teams clear the main barn before the loft breach team moves. This sequencing was deliberate. Agents did not know who was armed inside the main barn. The K9 units clearing that space first reduced the risk to the breach team operating in the more confined loft environment. At 11:47 p.m. on June 1st, surveillance monitoring reported a horse trailer departing the property via then a main heading east on Clover Ridge Road. The trailer's plate did not match any vehicle in the facility's documented transport fleet. The movement was not on any schedule the surveillance team had constructed. The trailer moved east at the highway speed limit with no apparent deviation. Teller and Case Agent Hamill were on a conference call within 90 seconds. The decision required: stop the trailer immediately and accept that everyone at the farm would receive an alert within minutes, collapsing the pre-dawn operation, or track the trailer and proceed with the operation on schedule, accepting the risk that whoever was in that trailer would be in motion and exposed for additional hours. What would you have done at 11:47 p.m. with 41 personnel stage and 4 hours until the planned breach? There is no clean answer. The command decision was made in under 4 minutes. Track and intercept. A Kentucky State Police rolling stop unit was positioned on I-64 westbound. GPS tracked the trailer in real time. The primary operation would proceed. At 3:47 a.m. convoy moved. At 3:49 a.m. breach. The main gate went down in 4 seconds. The secondary service entrance team used bolt cutters in 9. The Creek Bottom team moved through the fog on thermal optics. They had planned for the low visibility after the May 17th surveillance insertion, and they moved exactly on schedule. The back paddock team confirmed position at 3:49 a.m. on the 2nd. K9 handler Rodriguez released Colt at 3:50 a.m. into the main barn. Handler Chen released Vesper on a 15-second delay, creating overlapping coverage of the barn's ground floor geometry. Colt moved to the east wall and located the first individual, a stable worker who had been sleeping in a folding chair near the feed bins and who, immediately raised his hands and dropped to the floor. Vesper moved toward the rear of the barn and located the second individual in the far stall section, also non-resistant. The third individual, later identified as Marcus Dunnigan, 44, attempted to reach a storage cabinet on the barn's north wall before two agents physically controlled and secured him. Inside that cabinet, 3 prepaid mobile phones, a commercial-grade laptop running a messaging application with an active session, and a wire-bound spiral notebook hand-labeled schedules on the cover. Notebook contains 7 months of shorthand entries, a small drawn circle, an arrow for departure, a dash for transfer to an intermediate holding location. Over the full span of entries, 43 circles. 16 of those circles had no corresponding arrow or dash. 16 entries still on site. Breach Team Delta reached the loft staircase at 3:52 a.m. The door at the top was steel reinforced and secured with a commercial-grade padlocked hasp, the same lock that had been described to Ritter as a safety measure for unstable flooring. Team Leader Sergeant Walters deployed a hydraulic spreader on the hasp bracket. 12 seconds for the bracket to fail. The door swung inward. A narrow central hallway ran the length of the loft. Hay bales stacked floor to ceiling on both sides. 14 feet from the staircase, the hay bale stacks ended. Behind them, a plywood partition, floor to ceiling, constructed to appear as a structural dividing wall continuing the loft's interior layout. No visible seam. No visible door handle on the approach side. The entry point to the concealed room was a latch accessed from the interior, a push mechanism built into the partition on the hidden side. Team members identified the seam by tactile search and pressed through. The concealed room occupied approximately 400 square feet. Plywood subflooring laid over the original loft structure. 2 battery-powered camp lanterns on the floor, dark at this hour. A portable propane heater against the north wall, cold in the early June pre-dawn. Folded horse blankets arranged in 3 rows along the walls, sleeping surfaces. A 5-gallon bucket in the southeast corner, serving as a sanitation facility. Largely the sizes that had appeared in Ritter's delivery manifests. A second tote containing foil-wrapped food items, the kinds of individually packaged shelf-stable snacks listed in the manifests as food samples, miss. Some standing against the walls, several pressing backward as far from the noise and light as the room allowed. 3 showed visible physical indicators of inadequate nutrition and hydration over an extended period. Pallor, sunken eyes, cracked lips. All 16 were conscious. All 16 were ambulatory. None were bound. None had any apparent weapon. None had injuries assessed as immediately life-threatening. The medical team had staged 400 meters down Clover Ridge Road. They were radioed at 3:54 a.m. They were on site at 3:50 within the first 20 minutes. 3 required intravenous hydration. All 16 required transport to medical care. The triage was conducted by 6 medical personnel working simultaneously. Nobody used the word rescue in any of the radio traffic that night. The transmissions were clinical. Pediatric patients, 16 count. Vitals assessment in progress. Transport requested. The clinical language was deliberate. These personnel had done this before, or trained for it, and they understood that staying in the register of a medical scene rather than an emotional one kept them functional. 6 individuals arrested at Bluegrass Heritage Stables on June 2026. Dunnigan from the barn. The 2 stable workers. Sandra Foley, the unqualified veterinary technician, taken from a secondary residential structure on the property's eastern boundary. 2 additional individuals located in that same structure. A man and a woman whose specific roles in the network would be clarified in subsequent federal charging documents. 2 of the 6 had outstanding federal warrants predating their involvement with the stables. One from a 2022 trafficking case in Tennessee that had not produced an arrest. One from a 2024 fraud case in Georgia. On I-64 westbound, at the Frankfort-Shelby County interchange, the Kentucky State Police Rolling Stop Unit positioned the horse trailer at 4:14 a.m. The driver, later identified as Vincent Calabresi, 38, with no documented agricultural employment history, accelerated through the stop signal. The pursuit covered 3.1 miles before Caleb Ritter struck a concrete construction barrier, disabling the vehicle. He was taken into custody with non-life-threatening injuries from the collision. The trailer's hidden compartment was accessed through a false floor panel beneath the forward tax storage area. Interior dimensions: approximately 36 inches high, 8 feet long, ventilation through modified openings in the trailer's frame. 2 children alive. What do you think? When a network of this scale operates for 7 months across 4 states and 6 law enforcement jurisdictions without a single cross-agency connection being made, is that a systemic failure of how missing persons data is shared, or is it an unavoidable consequence of how fragmented local law enforcement databases remain in 2026? We read every comment. The victims had been reported missing from Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, and West Virginia between October 12, 2025 and April 28, 2026. The disappearances were distributed across at least 6 separate jurisdictions: county sheriff's offices, municipal police departments, state police posts that had maintained no active coordination because nothing had yet linked the cases to a single network. Each jurisdiction investigated locally. Each found the same thing: a miss had gone. None of the cases were officially closed. None had generated a federal cross-reference that named Bluegrass Heritage Stables. It was Ritter's manifests, the feed delivery anomalies, that created the connective thread. Federal prosecutors filed charges against 9 individuals: the 6 arrested at the stables, Caleb Ritter, and 2 additional co-conspirators identified through the financial forensics who had not been physically present during the raid. The charges included conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation. The 2 defendants with outstanding prior warrants faced concurrent charges from those prior cases. 8 of the 9 defendants were taken into federal custody. The 9th, a co-conspirator identified through the financial records, was located at a residence in Hamilton County, Ohio, and arrested by FBI Cincinnati on June 3rd. Something about the scheduling notebook doesn't sit right even now. One line in the federal indictment quotes directly from the notebook's operational shorthand. The notation system is simple to read once you know the key: circles, arrows, dashes. What's harder to sit with is the timeline. The notebook's entries begin in November 2025 and run through May 31, 2026, the day before the raid. The entries are regular, consistent, maintained with the kind of care you associate with a ledger someone expects to reference later. 43 circles over 7 months. 16 without departure markers on the night of the raid. 27 with departure markers, meaning and were transferred somewhere else before the operation concluded. Of those 27, the investigation had identified and confirmed the identities of individuals corresponding to some of those entries. But as of the date of this report, not all 27 departure circle entries had been matched to confirmed individuals. The investigation into the full scope of the notebook's accounting was ongoing. One fugitive from the network's organizational structure remained unlocated as of the close of the initial arrest phase. The scheduling notebook, the recovered prepaid phones, and 2 separate wire transfer records referenced an individual known within the organization as the coordinator. This person appears in 46 notebook entries and in a message thread spanning November 2025 through May 31, 2026. The final message attributed to the coordinator's number was sent at 11:22 p.m. on May 31st, the evening before the raid, approximately the same time the horse trailer departed the property. The message was a single word: out. The coordinator had no confirmed physical presence at Bluegrass Heritage Stables during the 41-day surveillance period. All documented communications used encrypted applications on hardware that has not been located. Federal investigators have characterized identification of the coordinator as a primary open investigative objective. As of this date, no public charging document has named this individual. The Delaware LLC dissolution filing for Meridian Equestrian Holdings was submitted electronically to the Delaware Secretary of State's office on May 3, first and automatically processed without verification. The registered agent service that handled the filing confirmed the submission came from an unidentifiable user. The beneficial owners of Meridian The individuals behind the LLC structure, distinct from the named personnel at the facility, have not been identified through publicly available court filings. The $1.3 million that moved through the secondary accounts during the operation's active period passed through a layered transfer sequence that ended at a cryptocurrency exchange with no U.S. regulatory presence. Asset recovery was listed as an ongoing objective in post-arrest federal filings. The money has not been recovered. Here's what this case tells us about 2026, and it's not comfortable. The network didn't require technological sophistication, novel methods, or insider government access to operate for 7 months. It required patience, a legitimate-looking property, an agricultural transportation loophole that has existed for decades rather than as a networked pattern, unless someone specifically connects the dots. Ritter connected the dots. But Ritter was a 22-year-old with a manila envelope and a phone camera, not a federal analyst with database access. He connected them because he was physically present and paying attention to numbers. The system did not generate this connection. A person did. Subscribe to this channel. Every case in this series is documented from federal court records, warrant applications, case affidavits, and law enforcement reporting. We cover the full picture, what worked, what nearly didn't, and what remains unresolved. The Carver family, original founders of Bluegrass Heritage Stables, who sold the property in 2019, cooperated fully with federal investigators and were not subjects of the criminal inquiry. The former state agriculture commissioner, named on the facility's advisory board, confirmed he had not attended a board meeting since 2021 and had not been informed the board continued using his name in facility literature. He was not a target of the investigation. He publicly resigned the advisory position the same day the arrests were announced. The retired circuit court judge issued a statement through his attorney and was not charged. The Lexington real estate developer named on the advisory board is cooperating with the ongoing investigation. Caleb Ritter spent 3 days in a federal witness protection safe house immediately following his disclosure to the Kentucky State Police, while investigators assessed the risk profile during the active arrest phase. He provided testimony before the federal grand jury. Federal prosecutors described his cooperation in court filings as essential to the initiation and successful prosecution of the case. He was not charged with any criminal offense. His employment at the facility was determined to involve no knowing participation in the criminal enterprise at any point during his tenure. He was 22 years old. He noticed a number that didn't add up. He photographed the manifests because barn lighting was poor. He sat in the police lobby and refused to leave. Those 3 facts are the mechanism of this case. Not surveillance technology, not financial intelligence systems, not cross-agency data sharing. A number that didn't add up, a habit of photographing paperwork, a lobby he refused to leave. Will the coordinator be identified? Comment yes or no, based on what you know about how federal fugitive cases like this typically resolve. We read everyone. The network at Bluegrass Heritage Stables is dismantled. 18 families or placed in appropriate care pending reunification. The scheduling notebook recovered from the storage cabinet contains 43 circles. 18 have been matched to recovered victims. 25 remain without confirmed names. The coordinator is not in custody. The $1.3 million not recovered. The Delaware LLC is dissolved. The beneficial owners have not been named. The demand that funded this operation did not end with the raid. The case is open.